Hey, what's going on, guys? I'm Mike from MOBOXgraphics.com, and in this video tutorial, we're going to be going over this micro interaction of a kind of a search icon that shifts into a search bar, that shifts into an audio visualizer. So let's just go ahead and jump right in After Effects here and just take a look. It's pretty simple. So I'm going to start off by creating a rounded rectangle. So I'm going to use the rounded rectangle tool. Let me just fit this to 100% and drag this down. So you're going to want to use the rounded rectangle tool, and I'll show you why in a sec. So if you hold Shift, it'll create a perfect square or a perfect rounded rectangle. I'm just going to center up the anchor point by pressing Y on the keyboard and then moving that right to the center. I want a stroke, but I don't want to fill. So I'm just going to get rid of the fill. And I'm going to open up this rounded rectangle here and take a look for something called roundness. And I'm just going to crank this up just until it stops becoming round. So 70 looks good. I'm just going to bring up the width here, or the stroke width. I think that looks good. And now I'm going to create a stem by just picking the pen tool, holding Shift, and clicking downwards. So I'm going to now move the anchor point of this to the top using this tool. If you don't have this tool, again, you could press Y and just drag it. I'm just going to make sure that this is perfectly attached to this circle. And I'm now going to rename this to stem and this to circle. And while I'm here, I'm going to parent this stem to the circle, hit R on the keyboard on the circle and just rotate this a few degrees. Unparent it and unrotate it. Basically, I just use this as a guide to rotate that stem. Okay, so now we need to set up some keyframes here. So I think I'm going to need a roundness, and I'm going to need size, and I'm going to need definitely going to need transparency, so I'm going to press T on the keyboard and then U on the keyboard. I think this might be enough. Okay, so from here, I'm going to create a layer new null object and parent these two objects to the null object. From here, I'm just going to hit S on the keyboard and scale this down. And weirdly, I find this stem to be kind of long, so I'm going to also hit S on the keyboard and scale this down. So I think that looks good. I think that looks good. I think maybe I need to rotate it a little bit more. So I'm just going to parent it again. Just a tad bit more. Then reparent it. Okay, so I'm going to set a keyframe here, or I already have keyframes for that. I'll just move these over. Come over about a second later. And with this unchained, I'm just going to stretch this out to create my search bar. But I'm also going to make the roundness a little bit less round and the opacity 0. Let's see, maybe I won't do that. I kind of like it round, but I do find that it is fairly thick. So I'm going to open up stroke here and hit J, I'll bounce back to that keyframe. So the keyframe for the stroke width, and then K, bring the stroke width down so it looks a little bit more appropriate. Press U on the keyboard to see all my keyframes. Turns out I don't really need roundness. I'm going to uncheck roundness. And I'm going to leave it there just for now, but I might change it later. And I don't think I need opacity. Okay, so now for this stem, I'm going to move it to the center of the line. Hit J on the keyboard to bounce back. And I want a rotation keyframe, and I want a position keyframe. And I probably want some stroke width and probably a scale. Press U on the keyboard to see all my keyframes now. Press K to jump to that point. So I need to rotate this to 0. I want to put it in the center there. Bring the stroke width down. And I notice here the scale's not working, so actually I'm gonna need, which one can I use if scale doesn't work for me? I could use this scale. Uncheck that, just make it a little bit less tall. So let's try to make that a little bit more interesting. Maybe by making this rotate like a full circle. See what that does. That looks a lot more interesting. So I'm going to smooth up these keyframes by using this tool. This is a plugin, but you could do the same by going to the speed graphs and adjusting them to make them look like this. These are all the same, whether they're upside down or not. They are the same. So I think that looks cool. And now for it to type something out. So previous, I actually created this. And what I did was I went to After Effects, I turned my screen recording on, and I actually typed out what I'm about to type out. And this is actually going to be helpful as a guide to show you kind of the tendencies of how people type. And because it's not consistent, people don't just type at the exact same speed every letter. They take breaks, they pause in weird spots. Certain keys are closer than others. So that's what I'm using this for. So I'm going to type out here what song is playing. I'm going to add a question mark. My recording doesn't have a question mark, but I think we're fine. I'm going to set the anchor point, actually make sure the paragraph, so the paragraph is left aligned, which is I want. Move the anchor point to the left, center, move this down, and I think I can go ahead and increase the text size slightly. Just like that. And now basically there's a quick, easy effect called typewriter. Just gonna put it on that layer and press U on the keyboard. So this basically will type out, but you'll notice that it's not typing out in the same timing. So I'm actually gonna delete that last keyframe and do this by hand. So the typewriting starts here. I'm just gonna increase the time until I get my W. So another keyframe. I think the next few letters all kind of go together. And then he does the space. And you can see how long the pause is between the next letter. Again, I think all of those kind of occur at the exact same speed. You just kind of have to go on your instincts. So we can take a look to see what this looks like. It doesn't have to be perfect, by the way. But it definitely looks a little bit more natural. Definitely looks more natural. So I can now just delete that layer. For some reason this doesn't look centered up, and I think it's because the G is a little bit long, but I want to make it look right, not be right. So I think that looks actually better. And I think this text is not black, and it's not. So I'm just gonna make sure it's black. Okay. Now we gotta move the cursor. So let's see. There's gotta be a nice way to do this, but I can't think about it other than well, here's an idea. Nah, that would be too difficult. I'm just gonna move it by hand. So I'm just gonna press P on the keyboard, set a keyframe. Make sure this is square, and there's no easing. So I'm just gonna make sure it's a linear keyframe. And that makes it square. I could have used my tool, which I may in the future, but that's how you do it. Let's take a look to see what this looks like. So that looks okay. It looks a little bit fast. Maybe I can move these over by a frame or something. That looks okay. It doesn't look great, but we'll just work with it. But if I press T on the keyboard, I could actually do something pretty neat here. Like I said, an opacity keyframe, but I want this to bounce between being bright and being 0, or being, you know, on and off. And the reason is that a mouse cursor does that, right? It blinks. So basically I'm going to be adding a blinking expression here. So I made it 100% opacity, 0% opacity, now up to 100% opacity. And if I alt click that, I can do loop out parentheses, and this will literally just blink forever. And I think that's a little bit slow. Speed that up a tad. Press U on the keyboard, I can see all my keyframes. And I'm just going to hold Alt and just drag this out a little bit. I don't like how delayed it seems that the first letter is. Overall, I think that looks okay. It's not my favorite. But then the person presses enter. So I'm just going to actually just Alt right bracket that stem out of the way because I don't need it anymore. So now, selecting this layer, pressing U on the keyboard, I'm going to create another keyframe for size. I'm going to bring this up in the Y direction, press G on the keyboard. And I'm actually going to press P on the keyboard on the text layer, set a keyframe, U on the keyboard, K on the keyboard to bounce back to the last keyframe, and just drag this up. So if I select these, I'm going to make them squares again, or diamonds. Again, you could right click and make them linear. And I'm just going to add the same smoothing effect that you can do again within the graph editor. Just make the shapes look like that. So I think that's a little extreme in the X direction, in the Y direction. It's a little bit better. And now for the fun part, or the not so fun part, depending on who you are. Layer new solid. Make this like red. Hit OK. And I need to drag in a music clip. So I'm going to bring in this clip here. It's an audio file. If I hit play, you could hear it. Just going to click that so I don't have to hear it. And I'm going to search for an effect called audio. So there's audio waveform and audio spectrum. They both kind of do the same thing. I'm going to use audio waveform. I might switch to audio spectrum. Let's actually just see what the difference is. I made a whole tutorial on this, by the way. If you go into YouTube and just type in audio spectrum or audio waveform in After Effects, you'll find it. But anyways, I'm just going to use, which one did I use? Audio Spectrum. They're basically the same thing. And I'm going to select the song. And you can see here that just kind of what happens. It creates an audio spectrum. Pretty simple. However, I want the start point to not be all the way on the end. So just bringing up some grids. I'm going to make this start point there. And the end point there. And I think that's centered up properly. So I can get rid of my grids now. And from here I could change the color to black. I'll warn you, this didn't work before. And it's again not working for some reason. So if I make these off black, it actually does work. And I'm not too sure why that happens. So I want to make these a little bit thicker. Decrease the softness. Why is that so soft? Or alternatively, you could just make this purple and then add a fill to it, which I'm going to do because it kind of irritates me that I can't get it perfectly black. So I can just make this black now. I don't know why it does that, but it just does it. So decrease the thickness now. So I like that. You can adjust different things here. So you get something that looks interesting to you. You just adjust the frequency bands, the thickness, the maximum height, and the start and end frequencies. And you can see they all kind of give you a slightly different effect. So I think that's probably good. And then you can adjust the offset to get a part of the song that you think looks better. So I think that looks good. And from here, I'm going to hit S on the keyboard, uncheck that, and set the Y to 0. Hit K on the keyboard and set the Y to 100. Press U on the keyboard to see all my keyframes. And for some reason, I didn't set a keyframe. So let me go ahead and set a keyframe there. J to bounce back. Set that to 0, and then add the same smoothing with this tool. The tool is great because you could add the same smoothing to every layer, and you don't have to deal with like having to match them in the graph editor. So I think I'm going to have this delay slightly or have a transparency. If I press T on the keyboard, set a transparency of 0, U on the keyboard, K on the keyboard, and then make that transparency 100. And again, add the same smoothing. One thing that bothers me a little bit is the thickness of these lines are all different. And I want them to all, I think, probably match the text. I think that one looks pretty good. But I think the stroke width here is a little too thick. So I'm going to bring that down. I think that looks better. Fits a little bit more. So now, unfortunately, no song is found. Could probably actually bring these over. We don't need a whole lot of time. One second or 2 seconds. And then this thing maybe shrinks to, say, no song found, or maybe it just doesn't even care. Maybe we just go back to where we were. So set keyframes. I'm gonna actually have to duplicate this stem layer because I cut it off previous. Press U on the keyboard. I don't know all of these crazy transparency and opacity stuff on this layer. Hold Alt to get rid of that one. So I'm gonna mess with that stem later, but I need these to come back to that point. And something interesting I could do with this text is if I create a layer new null object for the text and rename this to text null. See, because I already created positional movement here, so I don't want to go crazy with that. But this is in the center, so I can match the text to the null text, hit S and T on the text layer, U on the keyboard and U on the keyboard. And I could, if I hit K on the keyboard, I could actually bring the scale of the null to 0, wherever it is, and the opacity to 0. So it'll follow it down, but I need to add, again, the same smoothing factor to it so it all kind of matches together. And I probably need to add the same smoothing again to this. Again, make them diamonds. Add the smoothing. So that looks fine. And I'm also going to actually make this music layer also match up to the null. And you'll see it kind of folds back. Where adorable little stem starts. Just move these keyframes over. So why don't we have, where's our stem at? Oh, I gotta make it visible, that's why. So it comes down, and then the stem pops out. But for this stem, I think I actually want the anchor point to be at the top. So that way, when this scales, I can get rid of all these other erroneous keyframes on this layer. Press U on the keyboard just to see all of them. Just like that. Make them diamonds again and reapply my smoothing. Maybe even make this happen pretty quick. I think I want this whole thing to just happen faster. So if I select all the layers and I hold Alt, drag them in from the last keyframe, I could just make this whole thing happen way faster. Maybe not quite that fast, but we're getting close. Just make sure they're all the same smoothing. Again, just resetting the smoothing and reapplying it. Okay, so let's see what this whole thing looks like all together. So I kind of think that there should be something here in between the beginning and the end, but you could come up with something, and be sure to share them with us on Twitter and on Instagram and on Dribbble. Anyways, guys, if you want to download this project file, you can do so at our Patreon account, the $3 level. We appreciate all of our Patreons immensely. We love you very much. And if you want to also kind of hook up with us, you can jump into our Discord server. All the links for all that stuff will be down in the description. Anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching.